Let's move into the wide receiver position, and the Jacksonville Jaguars have a very reshuffled, different look, I guess, almost offense this year. Obviously, Calvin Ridley's not there now. Today, just before we recorded this, they did release Zay Jones. They did draft Brian Thomas. So there's Gabe Davis is there now. There is a huge amount of change in that one off. Like, it's
what do we do? What do we do with Gabe? Yeah.
So Brian Thomas, is he a good fit for what the Jaguars are looking to do? And then Christian Kirk is one of the pieces that is there and has been there. Will it hurt Kirk? Is there much overlap in that usage, or will it be something that could be beneficial to him?
That's a good question. I think I can't off the top of my head. I can't remember. I don't have it in front of me. But didn't Brian Thomas score like half or more of his touchdowns on slot fades? It was like that was kind of his thing. He was running these vertical routes out of the slot and was really dangerous in that area. And I feel like that's kind of what Christian Kirk is best at too. So there's a little bit of redundancy there. Redundancy is not always a bad thing, of course. And you can move a guy like Brian Thomas to the Z position where he's, going in motion before the snap and doing all that stuff, getting him into situations where he can get kind of like his speed going and then get up to top speed, because this guy's top speed is ludicrous, truly elite top speed type of player, especially for a guy his size. So, I comped him to Christian Watson. I kind of feel like he's going to be volatile in terms of his production, game in and game out, but there's definitely a ceiling there. I think he's extremely talented, but he was a hard one for me. I think there's a lot of players in this class that were kind of like difficult to get really excited about. Like I like the traits. I like the speed, obviously the size, but there was just something there that I wasn't quite ready to completely fall in love with the player kind of deal. And so landing in this situation, Trevor Lawrence, obviously a very good quarterback. I think there's a ton of upside here, but I think he's a more volatile player than I like, especially in the first round.
That kind of segues into this question of, this is a guy that he was expected to go in the first. He goes ahead of someone like Xavier Worthy, who I have absurdly high.
Nice.
And
I just picked him, so that's good to hear. Yeah.
And yet we have these other players who, they're not as interesting. They're not as exciting from a production perspective, but they fall into fantastic situations. I was reading through your grades, and you seem pretty happy with McConkey and Polk.
Yeah.
Kind of where they are at those spots. And it's interesting to me here because, Keon, Coleman, obviously very controversial, probably the best spot. You mentioned not really caring for Legette, and yet of all of these guys, he has the one standout season.
Mm-hmm.
How are you? It's interesting because Ben Gretsch obviously is a massive Washington Huskies fan. He told me some stories about how Polk disappeared, and I'm like, those. Obviously I knew they were true. Ben's not going to be wrong, but like the back of my mind's like, that can't possibly be right. And I go and look it up, and I'm like, oh yeah, he completely disappeared in multiple one-score games for them.
Yeah,
that doesn't seem great. McConkey is a guy who struggled to separate from a route perspective in terms of earning work for Georgia, but kind of has this Puka-ish element to his resume if you look at just what he did when he was out there.
Mm-hmm.
And now these guys are all in. It depends, again, going back to that Panthers deal, but they're in great situations. How should we be looking at them now that we know how early they went and where they went?
I think this is a hard class. This is a really hard class because I think in so many cases I had sort of I don't know if I'm using this even correctly, like a cognitive dissonance where I want to like a guy, but then I look at his stats and I'm like, this guy's stats are terrible. What are we doing here? I can't like him because he's terrible analytically. Like this is the A.D. Mitchell question. When I first watched A.D. Mitchell, I was like, this guy's a star. What are we doing here? Oh, why is no one talking about this guy? And this was very early in the process. And I was like watching, I'm like, this guy has everything you want. And then for the next,
I'm moving him up. Just hearing you say that, I'm moving him up.
but then the next 4 months, because I was like watching him in January, I'm like, this guy's a freaking stud. I love this guy. He's going to be a star, first rounder through and through. And then for the next 4 months, he was in the bottom left of every single graph I saw for anything you could imagine. He is the worst analytically, the worst statistically over the last 6 or 7 years. So I'm just like, I do not know what to do. This guy is probably better for me to just not take him in drafts and continue to live it's like one of those things.
No, he's your guy.
I know, but But there's just, you know what I mean? So I have this disconnect with so many players in this class. You mentioned Polk. Love him on tape. Agree. There's definitely some question marks. There was a couple of games in the middle of the season where I think he got, I don't know, maybe there was an injury or something, but he had a couple of drops. He was just, like you said, he kind of disappeared. But at the same time, and then this is like, you know, maybe just validating a bias, but I saw Matt Harmon in the reception perception study that he did of Polk. It was like outstanding. He was really good against zone. He was really good against man. He just had a great feel for settling. He didn't have any drops in the study that Matt Harmon did. Because it's just like one of those things like, do we talk about the games where he was awesome, or do we talk about the games where he was bad? So I was like very validating to see Matt Harmon really liked Jalen Polk's tape study and like basically how often he wins. To me, he's like a Robert Woodsy type of player, or like a Jacoby Myers, where he's probably never going to be a 1, but like a really solid number 2 in the right system.
I feel like you just moved Polk down a full round in everybody's rankings.
Maybe I'm trying to do that so I can get him.
It's just reducing the price.
Well, here's the thing. I would probably have said the same thing about Puka Nacua. Like even the bull cases, he's probably never going to be a number 1, right? Like that just doesn't make any sense because he's not super athletic. He's not, you know, explosive. He's just a guy that gets it done. He's just a, you know, workhorse type of player, but in the right situation, maybe he is. So I don't know.
So you've dampened expectations and then you've said that he's the next Puka Nacua.
Well, not to put words in Matt Harmon's mouth, because he said very specifically not to say that I'm calling him Puka Nacua. Don't aggregate it that I'm saying he's Puka Nacua, but Jalen Polk kind of reminds me of Puka Nacua, essentially was what Matt Harmon wrote. So anyways, I'm again, it's like just you agree with the stuff that confirms your biases. And I was like, yes, hell yeah. Also, by the way, he was an early 2nd round pick, which is a good sign. And he's got paired with a quarterback who I love, which is a great sign. I'm trying to disconnect this version of the Patriots from the past because this is a brand new situation. It's a brand new GM, brand new coach, brand new quarterback. This is a GM that came up through like the Packers organization and some of the like better drafting organizations throughout the last 20 years. And this is a team that, you know, Elliott Wolf, you know, the Packers have always been pretty good at evaluating receivers. So I'm hoping this like transitive property goes to the Patriots now. Anyways, this is maybe copium, but I'm just like really excited about Jalen Polk. I know he's not very good analytically. Again, but this is like the whole process, this whole season or this whole draft season. I've just been like, the guys I like are terrible analytically and the guys I don't like are good analytically. What do I do with this information? How do I reconcile this? So again, I think it's just very tough, but I really like Polk is the long or the short of it. I also like Javon Baker, by the way. So we'll see how that all kind of shakes out in New England.
So we do have a number of players then that went in round 3, and you know, some players do slide through the process. We've seen that again this year, but kind of the range where you thought they might go, but they could have potentially got less capital if things didn't go according to plan. So they also find themselves in pretty awkward landing spots. That's Corley, Burton, McMillan, and then McCaffrey. Is there anything that, you know, we should be looking into with those guys specifically? Any concerns about the landing spots? And then the last question I have is, out of that list, who is the biggest winner post-draft with where they landed?
Of that group?
Yeah.
I would say Burton, Jermaine Burton, is probably the most interesting one of this group by far. Obviously, you want to be paired with an elite quarterback like Joe Burrow. That's a huge deal. And it's stylistically
could be a sad time, Shawn. This could be our boy. This could be the retirement of our OG and Tyler Boyd.
Oh yeah, he's still free agent, right? Maybe not going to work out. Yeah. I think stylistically, though, you know, they don't look alike in terms of size and height and length and all that, but there's some T. Higgins to the way that Burton wins in terms of like vertical routes, separating late, great hands, ability to go up and pluck the football at the highest point. He's got great speed. He's probably way faster than T. Higgins. The reason he fell to the 3rd round, I think a lot of people you saw were talking about how he has, you know, 1st round tape in terms of talent and all that. There's just a lot of question marks about his personality and some of the character concerns, which I won't go into in depth because I don't have firsthand knowledge of it. But the things you hear are not promising. But, you know, he landed in an excellent situation. If T. Higgins is gone, he is the number 2 there probably by next year. So he's the type of guy who definitely worth a gamble if you're getting him in the late second or early third. Absolutely willing to take that chance with a guy like that in that situation. I think I was much lower on Corley than most people, I feel like, throughout this process and the NFL, obviously. I liked Malik Washington more than Corley in terms of like two guys that are somewhat similarly styled as yards after catch creators, slot type only receivers. Size wise, they're sort of similar in body type and everything. I think Corley he is a good tackle breaker. I didn't see a great route runner. I saw a guy that was very bad at playing through contact at the catch point. Not a very like his play strength is like weirdly bad for a guy that is like so physical as a runner and everything like that. So like as a route runner, as a receiver, I didn't like him very much. I think the situation's great though, obviously with the Jets, where he's going to get a lot of schemed up targets. He's going to get a lot of maybe even Randall Cobb-esque usage there. That's the bull case for him, I think. So certainly I'm open to the idea that he could be productive, but I just didn't really like his tape. I didn't think he was a receiver. He's like a running back playing receiver. And I personally really liked Malik Washington. So I thought in that stylistic comp, I would way rather have the guy that won the 6th round, which is a huge fall for him. Not that I was expecting. And then Corley, who went in the 3rd round or 2nd round. I can't remember off the top of my head. But
first pick of the 3rd round, I believe it was.
First pick of the 3rd round. So to me, that's just like, I didn't really understand that quite as much, unless they have a very specific plan to turn him into Randall Cobb 2.0, which is on the table. Jalen McMillan, I really liked him. I don't know. He was a slot only type of player for the Huskies for the most part, but he's got a good feel for finding the open spot. He's got good body control, a little bit of yards after the catch. I don't think he's a superstar, but a good, potentially the upside to develop into a number 2. And then McCaffrey, I don't know. That one felt like a reach to me, but again, you're pairing him with a exciting young quarterback in an offense that's probably going to throw the ball all over the place. So I think there is some intrigue there, but I just like a bunch of other guys more than him.
There are a couple of things there that really stand out to me that are pretty cool, at least in terms of as I'm looking at things, is that as I've got my top 50 written up here, will hopefully go out later today. And it deals with, how you would trade down if you want to trade down. If you're in that spot to take Corley, move down and take Washington, he's a much better version of that. And so to hear you say that as well.
Did you agree? You agree with that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Again, I don't have necessarily all of the like pure football insights to say that that's definitively the case. But if you look at basically everything about their profiles, It jumps out that it probably is the case.
I will say I got to Washington kind of late in the process. He's a 5th-year guy. Of course, that's not necessarily a good sign. And he wasn't super productive before this last season, but he was ridiculously productive in that season. So I think there's some signal there. This is also the bull case for Xavier Legette. I think obviously he didn't do anything the first 4 years, but then he was very productive this last year, which is a good sign. But with Washington, he is the polar opposite on tape to Malachi Corley. He is one of the strongest receivers at the catch point I saw, period, in this draft class. He would just body opposing corners, box them out, extremely strong hands. He won in those contested catch situations or just tight coverage, and it's hard to see exactly where the ball went. He was coming up with these catches constantly. He was like very, very strong hands and very strong in traffic. The yards after the catch, I think he was one of the top guys in this class in terms of yards after the catch per reception. Very strong, physical runner, good athleticism. This is a former national champion sprinter in the 4x100 as a high schooler. So he's obviously got the speed.
42-inch vertical.
42-inch vertical. Obviously, he's got explosiveness. And then you add in, so obviously this is, again, maybe copium because he fell to the 6th round. But if you watch the video, I don't know if you guys saw this, when they called him, when they were drafting him, the GM was like, I think it was Chris Greer, was essentially saying, look, Mike McDaniel has been bugging me for the last 3 or 4 rounds to draft you. And McDaniel is like Buggy, I've been harassing you to draft you. And McDaniel basically, and this is, of course, this is a great, sometimes these things don't pan out and whatever, but he's just like, man, you can come in here if you work hard, you play like a pro, like you could get time immediately. They have an opening for a wide receiver 3 there. I don't see like a lot of competition.
They need someone for that.
Yeah, honestly. And so, and he's, I mean, man, again, this is like the awesome. I almost don't care that he fell to the 6th round because he fell to the Dolphins, who is like the perfect offense for this guy. This is, yards after catch creators is what they love. Guys who are tough and physical and catch the ball and can go over the middle. That's where Tua loves to throw the football. Like there's so many things, so many variables that make me think this could be an outlier in the 6th round who comes in and is immediately productive. I just took him in the 3rd round of a draft. There's some other guys in there that I didn't, that probably are more safe to take, I think, at that spot. But I'm just so excited about what he could do. Plus I just, again, this is leaning into your film takes a little bit, but I loved him prior to the draft. I don't understand why he fell so far, to be honest.
That's really cool. Yeah. I mean, he was unbelievable in that final year there at Virginia. The other little note I would have is just the thing that always jumped out at me when I was trying to understand Adonai Mitchell was the context. And I mean, you said some very positive things about Burton. I know that you like McConkey. When those guys are freshmen at Georgia, Mitchell has more routes and he has far more air yards than either one of them. Yeah, I mean, maybe the actual production isn't there, which the actual production doesn't matter. But,
right,
if he had gone somewhere other than to Anthony Richardson, I'd be like, draft him every time. But now I'm like, I think you got some massive risk in a variety of ways. I'm excited to hear you give us some late rounders who are better than the early picks. We'll see if you have anybody who jumps out to you here. We have Baker over Polk. We have Jacob Cowing over Pearsall. We have the Oregon State track star over Mitchell, which is kind of an interesting one when you look at those two guys side to side. And then you have Brenden Rice or maybe Cornelius Johnson over McConkey. Are there any of these guys who could simply be, because we do see situations where teams double dip and it's the second guy who's the star. Yeah. You go all the way back to Anquan Bolden being the second receiver that the Cardinals draft there. Any of these deep guys, players we should be keeping a really close eye on, any of them who could push the sort of big name player?
Yeah. Well, everything, all my love for Polk notwithstanding, like I do love Polk. I think Javon Baker is very interesting also. I think there's certainly a world where he emerges as the go-to guy, the favorite of a Drake May type player, because Drake May stylistically loves to push the ball down the field. Like he is a big game hunter. He likes to go for the big play. Javon Baker is that style of player. He could win on the outside. He wins at the catch point. He's got a little bit of twitch to him. He's got that dog in him. I don't know if you heard his interview after the draft, but he was like pissed that he went in the 4th round. He was like so mad. And he said something along the lines of, I make people in wheelchairs stand up, bring the popcorn. So
I did see that. Yeah.
He's a character. I like him.
Which is awesome because that was about the earliest he could have possibly gone, right?
Right. He's like pissed off. This is like exactly where he was pretty much projected. Another guy with pretty good pedigree. Like he was a former sort of big recruit, started at Alabama, went to he transferred to get more playing time and all that. And I think his tape is really good. His route running is really good. Just it's a matter of him putting it all together. Right. I think Javon Baker is definitely worth taking a gamble on just because of the talent and the situation. I mean, Polk and Baker could end up being like the 1-2 punch in this offense as soon as next year, 2025, along with like Demario Davis or whoever. And we're talking about pairing these guys with a young ascending quarterback who I really like. So I like those options a lot. I was very excited about seeing where Jacob Cowing would go. I don't think he's better than Pearsall, but he's certainly interesting in that offense with again, this is a really good offense, scores a ton of points, a good quarterback and Brock Purdy that is near perfect in that offense. I don't think he's better than Pearsall though. So I probably wouldn't say that. I do think he's interesting as a sort of a flyer. Anthony Gould over AD Mitchell is interesting stylistically. If you look, so here would be like how I convince you. I don't actually believe this, but this is how I would convince people to believe this. if you look at the Texas offense, who was the most productive guy in that offense? It was Xavier Worthy. What was the type of routes he was running in that offense? It was like the short and intermediate stuff. A.D. Mitchell was running wind sprints out on the outside, never getting the football. You know, in an RPO heavy offense, like we see with the Colts, maybe Anthony Gould just fits that better, get some yards after the catch, get some schemed up stuff. Again, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen because they got so many guys there now with Pittman, Downs, A.D. Mitchell. It's probably just not going to happen, but you know, you never know. This is how I come to him. He's a poor man's Roman Wilson. Similar style player, electric speed, maybe not like the greatest separator, but he was like a not small school, but like, you know, less famous school version of Roman
Here you're
Wilson.
coming in with your living on the Pacific Coast, but giving us the East Coast bias. I mean, Danny, the Arizona Wildcats men's tennis team just got left out of the top 8 seeds in the national tennis tournament, despite being the Pac-12 champions and having defeated the number 2 team in the nation.
Ooh, unfair.
You're now referring to Oregon State as a small school, which I feel like I did that for UCF.
Small in stature and cachet and prominence. You know what I mean?
Sure. The Pac-12 does that. It's funny watching the Pac-12 network too, like broadcast events as if it's something that's going to exist in 15
I know it's
months.
like RIP. This is it's like I don't even know what to compare it to. Dead man walking.
Did you have anything on Brenden Rice that is interesting there, or I mean these guys were drafted really late. They don't seem...
I would say, I mean, there's always a chance with Brenden Rice because he's sort of different stylistically than most of the other receivers on the Chargers at this point. I would say I was not very impressed with him at the Senior Bowl. This is maybe just letting that be too much of an anchor. I just thought wasn't super impressed. He had a couple of really ugly drops. So this is something similar that happened with Tez Walker too. Like he had the worst Senior Bowl imaginable, and it's just like hard to kind of get that out of your mind. It's not everything, but it's something. And I feel like I sort of just wrote Tez Walker and Brenden Rice off after being there in Mobile, even though I maybe probably shouldn't have, just because it's just 1 week and a couple of practices, and it's probably not reflective of who they are. But I would say that's probably where I ended up just not being in on Rice at all.
Is Quentin Johnston somebody who stands out as being like a possible guy to still draft after? I mean, the Chargers haven't, even with McConkey, they haven't done a lot.
Right. I probably just let other people do that, to be honest. They
might just be going to play with no wide receivers this year. That might be the
right.
And they don't, as we talked about already, they don't have an influx of running backs either. So I
just think it's I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but like he just doesn't seem to fit like the personality and style that they're trying to do in Los Angeles now with the Chargers. Like they want to be smash mouth. They want to have guys that'll, block their asses off on the outside or whatever. I just don't know if he like really fits that. I feel like if they're going to run 2 receiver sets, it's going to be Josh Palmer and Ladd McConkey probably. But we'll see. Obviously Quentin Johnston has the size, he has the athleticism and all that, but he had a pretty good opportunity last year to do anything, and he didn't. So that's usually not a great sign.
We want to finish up here with the tight ends because you had some great tight end notes in your draft grades. I think that when you look at this class after Bowers, it does get a little tricky to separate the deep guys, but they're still going to be very relevant potentially in tight end premium and at the prices that they'll demand in rookie drafts, which you're talking about at the very, very end. So you have guys like Theo Johnson, Erick, Cade Stover, Jared Wiley, Jaheim Bell, if we can get tight end out of him, hopefully. But how would you break that down? Do you have like a biggest sleeper, a guy who's gonna be like just a blocker, somebody that fantasy managers need to do their research on to like learn about them? What can you tell us about these tight ends who aren't exactly deeper tight ends, but they would be for most fantasy managers?
Yeah, I would say the most exciting moment of the draft for me was watching Jared Wiley get drafted by the Chiefs. for very obvious reasons. Although they did end up extending Travis Kelce like a couple days later. So again, you're going to have to probably be a little bit patient with this one. But I really like Jared Wiley. Prior to the draft, he ended up being my tight end 2, and I don't think he's he's right now not a very good blocker, or not a type of guy you can rely on to be a blocker, but he athletically was very interesting to me. He reminded me of watching Jake Ferguson, where he's taller, a little bit more lanky or whatever, but very good movement skills, very good body control, like the way he can run routes and separate, very good hands. I want to say he only had like 1 drop. And he's the type of guy who could create a big play. And that's like what you want at the tight end position. He's a very good athlete. He had an 81-yard touchdown in one play. You don't see that very often from a 6'6" guy. So I think there's some things to like there. Obviously he fell to the 4th round. Odds are he's probably not going to ever turn into anything, but I think he's the type of guy I would certainly grab in the 4th round in case he ends up being sort of the heir apparent at some point down the line to Travis Kelce. I would say Erick All going to the Bengals. In fact, both of the Bengals tight end picks are interesting to me. Erick All went in the 4th round. Tanner McLachlan went in the 6th round. Erick All, if you look at some of the, yards per route run stats and things like that, he definitely pops. He has a couple of injuries. I again, like the Jared Wiley, I think this is maybe a silly way to do it, but like I almost just grade tight ends with how they move. I know that sounds like really reductive, but like I don't think, take this for instance, like Theo Johnson, I didn't think he ran like he tested, if that made any sense. Like I don't think he moved around the field like he tested. He tested as an absolutely elite athlete. When I was watching his tape, I was like, he just kind of moves like a guy. Like he doesn't look overly explosive to me. He doesn't separate. So a guy like Erick All, I thought moved really well, was very good body control, could run routes, could twist and contort and catch the football. So I think there's something there with him. I thought Tanner McLachlan, the same deal. I believe he's a former receiver. And so he has obviously the receiving skills as a movable type tight end. Very good athlete. All these guys are very good athletes. The Erick All, Tanner McLachlan, Jared Wiley, I want to say all had, or I know Wiley had like a 9+ RAS score. And so those are the types of guys I'd be looking to draft in this class. Otherwise, I don't think there's any. I wasn't particularly interested in Sinnott before the draft. I am now, obviously, because he landed in the 2nd round. But is he an H-back? I don't really know what he is for them. Is he going to be, like a Kyle Juszczyk? Where
he's a Sam Laporta 2.0. We'll have you.
I know he's like the same size and relatively athletic as Sam Laporta, but I just, to me, I didn't see that type of player. But again, a lot of times
the true question is he going to have to be like Trey McBride and sit behind Zach Ertz for the majority of the season?
Freaking Zach Ertz! Can this guy retire already? I'm sick of him. Yeah. But yeah, I think obviously there's a lot of very good NFL tight ends that didn't do the same thing in college. They kind of developed into that. And so I'm very open-minded when it comes to Sinnott, but I just felt like when I was watching him, he felt like an H-back more than a tight end.
We've heard those concerns. And so that's one of the things kind of watching for the landing spot or where the draft slot was, because it didn't seem like H-back territory, but you can never put it past these NFL teams.
I know.
I appreciate you saying that about Johnson. Not that you're going to be right or we're going to be right, but one of the things that I noted in several places in the RotoViz rookie guide is that his coaches preferred other tight ends on his own team, which that's
not a great sign.
A bit of a red flag.
And I think I mentioned this before with Jadavian Sanders, where I honestly like Tommy Tremble, the way he moves, the way he runs routes. Maybe the team just wants Tremble to be a blocker and they just don't want him running routes. That's certainly possible. And because Sanders isn't much of a blocker, but when I see some of these landing spots, I'm like, is this guy better than the guy that's already on the team? I'm not sure. With Theo Johnson, I think Daniel Bellinger might be better than this guy. And so I'm probably not going to be a big investor in Theo Johnson. That being said, like athleticism is so important. When you have a guy with this freakish athleticism, I'm always open-minded about it. You know what I mean? Like this is, I didn't really see the movement skills on tape, but he obviously tested extremely well. If the team wants to use those athletic traits in their passing game, maybe he'll end up looking a lot better in the pros than he did in college. That's happened time and time again with tight end position. But for me, the guys that I liked the most, again, were Wiley was my tight end 2. I did like Erick All, and Tanner McLaughlin to me is like a fun, just probably UDFA at this point in terms of the rookie drafts, but a fun guy to just kind of like throw into the end of your roster. Maybe he ends up being better than All, or maybe All gets hurt again, kind of deal. And he could develop into sort of the tight end in that group. And then Cade Stover is another guy whose name I'd throw out there. A good athlete, good body control, does a little bit of everything, blocks. He could end up being a wide tight end for Houston after Dalton Schultz moves on. 4th round draft capital isn't necessarily going to lock anybody in long term, but they might have saw something with him that they liked. And obviously you're looking for guys that will be paired with elite quarterbacks down the line. And so Stover is another guy that I'd probably be willing to take a little bit of a flyer on very late in the draft.
The final question I'm going to throw out here, and I keep doing this because people keep, we just keep skipping over Bowers, but Bowers did have a landing spot.
I always leave him off the sheet.
Yeah, Shawn leaves him off the sheet. But in this case, we have a situation where he lands with Las Vegas, and when we're looking at landing spots, it isn't the best spot that we could have put him into, but it's obviously still, he's going to have the opportunity there.
Yeah.
It's probably, out of everything, for Mayer is probably the worst situation, because they took him last year, and he was somebody that we talked a lot about and we did like, and I have him in a lot of dynasty rosters, but not a really good situation unless they're planning on to play a lot of 2 tight end sets. But
right,
how do you feel about the Bowers landing spot, and has that, in terms of your dynasty or redraft rank, has that changed where you'd be willing to take him by much?
I would say not dramatically, but yeah, it was a little bit of a bummer for him landing
that
there.
was for sure.
I think maybe I'll drop him like a spot or 2. Maybe like how, move JJ McCarthy up above him, Drake May above him. Because I think originally I was thinking pre-draft, he's like a top 5 guy, period. Especially in the tight end premium leagues, which most of my leagues are tight end premium. And so I had him very, very high. I would be fine if people wanted to drop him down a couple of spots. I wouldn't drop him down like a huge amount, just because he's still supremely talented player.
And they're likely to have a different quarterback, in 12 months' time. So again, it can change very quickly for him.
Right. And so I still
know Shawn is a big Gardner Minshew supporter, so Shawn's probably delighted with the landing spot.
I mean, in terms of quarterbacks that are willing to like sort of take the small win and dump it off and get a guy, get rid of the ball quickly, just take care of the football, that type of stuff. I think Bowers is going to get plenty of volume, and there's a chance he ends up being sort of
a wide receiver too.
If not the third guy in terms of targets on this team, maybe the second guy in terms of targets on the team. Wouldn't be shocking to me. But that being said, yeah, obviously you would have preferred not to completely kill Michael Mayer's dynasty value. That would have been more ideal, since I did take him pretty early in some drafts last year.
I have plenty.
Yeah, so
thankfully there was another tight end last year that myself and Shawn drafted a lot more of, that probably saved us from some additional Mayer.
Yeah. So, man, it'd be great if they just trade Michael Mayer. Maybe just like hope for that. But overall, I actually saw this as kind of a positive for Bowers, just at least from a pure football point of view. My worry, and I wrote this in my draft guide, was that some jabroni team was going to draft Bowers and try and make him like a real tight end. You know what I mean? Like, that was my biggest fear. Oh yeah, we're going to develop him. We're going to try and get him, blocking, in line, blah, blah, blah. Like all that crap that you hear some of these coaches talk about. This to me indicates they know and understand and appreciate and love what he is. And that's not a tight end. He's essentially a big slot receiver, or, just movable chess piece that can line up all over the formation, get him isolation routes. They can let Michael Mayer do all the wide tight end stuff that you hope he wouldn't be doing, and just let him run routes and catch the football. So from a real football point of view, I think it's good for Bowers. It's just complicated fantasy because he might not be on the field as much as you want now. I don't know. It is a little bit of a bummer, but I think usage wise, this indicates to me that they don't see him as like a wide tight end. They see him as a receiver, essentially, like a playmaker.
Awesome information from Danny, and as Shawn mentioned earlier, it's always one of the favorite shows. We have a select group of guests that we have on each year, but this is fantastic to run through these. And it is a lot of fun to talk through all these players now that we have the draft done. We have the landing spots, we know the depth charts. Well, we don't know the depth chart, but we can kind of project them in our minds. And Danny, obviously, you can find him over at the ringer.com, the fantasy football podcast over there. The draft show is obviously finishing up because the draft is over, and they're taking it over to the fantasy football side of things now for the rest of the year. But Danny, anything else going on that you want to let the listeners know about?
Yeah, we'll be releasing our first iteration of the fantasy football guide at theringer.com pretty soon here over the next couple of days. That includes my full dynasty rankings, or at least top 200 dynasty rankings and rookie rankings. So you can check that out in addition to the Ringer Fantasy Football Show.
That's awesome. Thank you, Danny, for jumping on. And as always, you can find out Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. We'll have another show coming out on Friday where we'll be diving into some of the information discussed in those. But until we are back, my name is Colin Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out his work up on rotoviz.com. And until then, have a good one.